Falcha. Welcome back to Irish Granny Tarot. This is part 3 in our book, The Believer, about John Mack. And we are at the beginning of chapter 25. Good evening, Doctor. Jacques Vallee. Love Jacques Vallee. Astronomer, mathematician, astrophysicist, scientist, folklorist, author, and the model for the French researcher in Close Encounters. He was excluded from the MIT conference because he would not hand them over his data to be vetted. He called himself the only expert who did not know what UFOs were, which I just love. He refused to characterize them. He said others were all too certain that they were spacecraft from another planet. Vallee acknowledged that he was not easy to categorize. As he himself summed it up, one moment you talk about UFOs as if they were real physical material objects, in the next instance you talk about them as psychic effects producing paranormal phenomena in and around the witnesses. This was a fair criticism, Vallee said. I can only answer that this ambiguity is general, and it lies in the data. In a 1992 symposium in Albuquerque, which he was invited to, Vallee said he believed that genuine physical UFO phenomenon did exist. He speculated but couldn't prove that it involved a non-human form of intelligence. He called ufology a forbidden science, doubly so with skeptics refusing to entertain possibilities averse to their rational universe, and UFO advocates fearing that the scientific method would expose their research incompetence. He maintained that the conventional abduction narratives left out data that didn't fit. They would just dismiss it. Many incidents, he said, were not traumatic, and many did not involve Little Ray Man. And many did not involve laboratory testing of people, physical exams. He thought that some stories distorted the reality of what happened to mask government or military activity. He also thought that the number that were estimated were way too high, or he said that if those numbers are correct, the aliens are very poor scientists to need that many specimens to come up with something. However, he said there's no problem by nature unscientific to explore if it's approached properly. This can be studied. Rigorous investigation is needed, better exchange of data, and better field work. For example, doing metallic residue studies. His inspiration, interestingly enough, was Philip K. Dick, who experienced communication from a life force he could not identify. Some living, highly intelligent entity manifested itself inside me and around me, but what it was, what its purpose was, where it came from. I've tried 1,000 theories and all work equally well, but at the same time, each theory leaves some datum unexplained. And I know this is not going to change. He wrote this, Dick did, in 1978. I have the impression that a master game player and magician and trickster is involved. He has some crazy stories that happened to him in his life. I highly recommend reading up on Philip K. Dick. He didn't come up with his stories, his written stories, out of absolutely nowhere. Do robots dream of electric sheep? I can remember that for you wholesale. Total Recall was a movie made from his short stories. And then there's another one that I don't remember. I always have trouble remembering the titles. Whitley Strieber also felt that the core narrative that was going on here was too simplistic, that there was something a whole lot more unintelligible going on. Mack agreed, but he felt obliged to stick to his patient's story and not go too far into anomalous aspects. He just focusing on the psychiatric part of the story of the people's experiences. Strieber had an abduction experience that he wrote about in the book Communion. And on the cover of Communion is the famous gray alien with the eyes, and that's really what triggered cultural awareness of this image. Carrie Banks Mullen, a biochemist, in 1993 got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. And this is the guy who invented polymerase chain reactions to replicate human DNA quickly, which allowed us to do the human genome. He is an abductee. Has no memory of it until he read the book Communion and went, oh my God. While he read it, his daughter called. He was reading the book, and his daughter in another city called and said, there's a book you have to read. And she'd had the similar experience. So, and it's often familial. Louise White, a professor emerita of anthropology at the University of Florida Center for African Studies, recognized parallels in the alien abduction story with stories from Eastern Africa, East African belief that white firefighters came at night, kidnapped black people, did experiments on them, took blood from them for white colonists who were vampires. And this common story from East Africa. And she saw these similarities. What is this going on? Is there something behind both of them that's a common thing? Her question, why did aliens need so much experimentation with human reproduction? Is the story of alien-human breeding parallel to the colonial era debates about miscegenation? If you think about it, alien-human, yeah, you know. So why would Mack be singled out from all psychiatrists to be the one to bring this story into the public? Well, she believed the important factor was he believed in aliens. So, chapter 26, Stuck. Harvard had tolerated all this until a mocking article appeared in the Wall Street Journal about an upcoming mini-series on television called Intruders, and the article scoffed at Mack, Jacobs, and Hopkins. And this is when all the crazies started making phone calls. These guys were invited to a late-night talk show, a local late-night talk show in Philadelphia, and they were ridiculed on TV. It was mortifying. It was really terrible. Mack approached the medical school dean, Daniel Tostison, it's hard to say. Tostison suggested doing a double-blind study of the abductees. Mack accused him later of getting all super Western science-y. So Mack was very reluctant to tell Rudenstein, the Harvard president. His wife knew, but he was reluctant to talk to him. He began to silence debate about whether this experience was real or not. He felt that it was real and just not explained. And I felt there was a huge Western resistance to the idea of travel on an astral plane, coming into the physical plane. He found much more acceptance as when talking to the Dalai Lama and Buddhists. They had a much more open acceptance of notions of other dimensional consciousness. And he was put off by the Western resistance. Bad things and issues were increasing in his marriage. His wife didn't want to join him when he got together with other people to do psychedelics. And he began having issues with getting older. He felt powerless over the notion of death. His 30-year younger girlfriend got pregnant by her husband, because she was in an open marriage, or by Mack, unknown. He was told by his astronomer that his chart showed a, quote, tight Mercury square Pluto. We'll have to call Denise. I have no idea what that means. So it meant that when he developed an interest in something, he became obsessed by it. And he had a desire to transform the thinking of other people. It's in his chart. He began doing a seminar at Harvard about non-ordinary states of consciousness, other experienced realities. And it involved lots of discussion about hypnosis, LSD, mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, William James, Carlos Castaneda, just all kinds of stuff. Mack's work was spreading, and here's a little interesting tidbit that I did not realize. Now, I've never seen this show, but I know what it is. I've heard about it. I don't like the woman in it. What's her name? She always looks like she smells something bad on her upper lip. X-Files. His work was what X-Files was based on. So they had the first annual Ig Nobel Prize with David Jacobs. He was awarded, Mack and Jacobs were awarded, that was in a periodical called the Psychological Journal of Irreproducible Results, which is a real zing if you're a scientist. It's intended to be a huge insult. And the first annual Ig Nobel Prize in Psychology, John Mack and David Jacobs, the science humor magazine, first make people laugh and then make them think, cited the two as mental visionaries for their leaping conclusion that people who believed they were kidnapped by aliens from outer space probably were, and especially for their conclusion, in Professor Jacobs' words, the focus of the abduction is the production of children. They shared the dishonors with 3 urologists recognized for their painstaking medical paper, Acute Management of the Zipper-Entrapped Penis. The research was all genuine, as if to demonstrate that in science nothing was too ridiculous to be studied. Mack took it with good humor. Jacob said he was proud to share any laurels with John Mack. Can't be too sensitive if you get into this area of work, that's for sure. Chapter 27, The Whole Bloody Snowsuit. Mack got a book deal, and this would be the book, Abduction. 1994, New York Times Sunday Magazine did an interview before the book came out about lots of touchy areas. His ego, Esalen, using psychedelics, his marriage. He said that he didn't really agree with Jacobs and Hopkins about the transformative aspects of experience, about the warnings about nuclear and ecological problems and how we treat the earth and each other. He wasn't into that, which surprises me, really. Anyway, this was a staggering issue for Mack. How supernatural stuff is crossing over and being experienced on a physical plane by ordinary people. That's what got him the metaphysics of it. Mack admitted that he was a co-creator with the abductees, and he meant by that his reputation and presence led them together, and he didn't feel that was the same as leading somebody to believe something. He said they were drawn to him because they knew about him, not he made up their stories, basically. He pointed out that he was raised to believe in nothing, that there was no greater intelligence than human intelligence. And therefore, he said it's like a recalcitrant communist who becomes a right-winger. He was interviewed by the esoteric reporter from Psychology Today. They asked for physical evidence, and he was only able to point out scars and cuts on people's body. He said that he believed we're being pushed to look beyond the reliance on physical proof by this phenomenon. And it's really astounding how this book leads into the next book. I know I've said that, but this just blows my mind, because when I began the book for next week, I had no idea John Mack is even mentioned in it. So a little tidbit of what's coming up. He was asked why the elite of the culture resisted the idea while grassroots population accepted UFOs. And he says because the elite have a vested interest in weapons and mass culture and advertising and scientific establishment and universities, they would be trivialized if ETs showed up. They would be very unimportant overnight, and threatens places like Harvard. He hoped his book would raise questions of our place in the universe. He didn't want to abandon a scientific paradigm, but he asked whether subjective and objective materialist dualism structure was the best way to understand matters not fitting into the physical fourth dimensional reality. It's all getting a little cerebral here. That Newtonian and Einsteinian universe may actually not be able to explain it. In other words, our understanding of our reality may not be up to par to understand this. Chapter 28, Peer Pressure. So the galleys of the book were released too soon, and names of people were revealed, and mistakes had to be recorrected. It was just a big mess. He met a psychiatrist, Fred Frankl, and he did grand rounds with Mack, and this is like an analysis. And he asked about a former patient of Frankl's. Frankl asked about one of his former patients who now was seeing Mack about being an abductee. And Frankl accused Mack of being unethical. He said that if you don't disbelieve them, you convey that you're comfortable with their claims, and that's not neutrality. He met with a media consultant, Mack did, to prepare for hostile reception at book release things. He was warned about his body language. He was warned to be sure to tell the truth and to come from a point of love and respect, to not get hostile. They practiced questions. For example, question, are you creating a new religion? And his answer was, yes, there is a spiritual element to this. It's a rediscovery of what's sacred in nature. Question, UFOs come from where? And Max says, I don't know. We aren't good with I don't know, but I don't know. Question, is this a government cover-up? And he said, I don't have any kind of solid evidence about that. Question, would you be creating these memories in people? And his answer is that question raises the question, where are these memories located to begin with? If I'm putting them in people's heads, where are they located to begin with? And what do you say to the people who are told that they're crazy? And he says it's a fundamental question. Some 75 to 80 people show me they have experienced some kind of energy, beings, whatever we call it, entities that entered their world, and those accounts so tightly similar among people not in touch with each other all over the country. And as far as I can tell as a psychiatrist, the only thing that can do that is an authentic, real experience. As reluctant as I am to believe such a thing was possible, that, in fact, seems to be occurring. And then they asked him, is this a midlife crisis? And he says, well, you aren't the first one to say that. So, chapter 29, Aliens in Brazil. So the first real abduction story came out in 1957 from Brazil, when a 23-year-old farmer named Antonio Vilas Boas, on a tractor one night, saw an egg-shaped UFO land, and small creatures pulled him in. He was used for sperm collection, and then they left. And afterwards, he had trouble sleeping. He was nauseated. He was very upset. He told a journalist about it. Mack met with a Brazilian author, Gilda Moura, who wrote a UFO book, was famous. And they met with a large group of mediums, over 100 mediums, who were removing evil spirits from people. He went to a lot of different rituals and experiences while he was in Brazil. He was hypnotized and said that he pursued UFO stories because they meant that he wasn't alone because of the death of his mother, that there was life in the universe, that abduction was the opposite of his original family belief system, and he welcomed the opposite to have a conscious belief system. He met many people with different experiences, including a Brazilian Navy engineer who saw a UFO go into the sea, and he talked with him at length. Chapter 30, The Time Bomb, a New York Times Magazine article. 1 month before the book Abduction was released, they called him and they said that he was mystically detached and certain that he is right all the time, and that he divests way too much on the sexual experiences in the book, like an orgy in space. He said his colleagues feared that he'd gone mad, and they were very disappointed in Mack. So this interview turned out to not to be such a great thing. Then Psychology Today article came out and was a huge shockaroo to him too. He's always surprised when people don't embrace this whole thing wholeheartedly. One of the best and brightest, the article began, a Pulitzer Prize winning psychiatrist has made himself into a high priest of what is politely called the abduction phenomenon. This ridiculed Mack for believing Hopkins' claims that some abductees were returned to Earth in the wrong clothes. Would aliens smart enough to traverse the universe screw up like that? Hopkins' reliability began to crumble like old cake over his Brooklyn Bridge abduction case, which she asserted had been convincingly debunked by UFO researchers, although the debunking was itself later debunked. She questioned what it meant for Mack to attach himself to Hopkins, given their differences. Hopkins is an artist, but Mack is a high priest at a most sanctified temple of science, Harvard Medical School. He also happens to be a man with a halo of perfection about him, an honorable man given to just causes, a man with a reputation for kindness. Mack, more than anybody, needs to be rigorous in his research, otherwise he may become a kind of Pied Piper, seducing and perhaps terrifying us with visions of a world that may not exist. What proof did he offer? None, really. The mental normalcy of experiencers has hardly been as verified as Mack claimed, and hypnosis was fraught with pitfalls. Mack is the most frustrating type of true believer, congenial, intelligent, and absolutely impenetrable. The real disappointment is that he brings us no closer to the truth, even though he could. So, that wasn't very good. Time magazine reporter James Wilworth wanted an interview with him, and he asked him, "Did you set up a research design?" And Mack asked, "How? I don't have a private practice. I do full-time academics. I got a grant from the Rockefeller Center to study interspecies communication. There are no models for this kind of research, no standard conventional model." Wilworth was a skeptic and not only into interviewing only true believers. He told Mack that the experiencer Donna Bassett had admitted that she'd made the whole thing up and had lied to Mack. So that was a bit of a shock. Chapter 31, Oprah. He appeared on Oprah. The show was taped for air 2 days before the book came out. He told Oprah, "These people don't have mental issues." Oprah said, "Is this physical or spiritual?" He said, "It's not that simple." She said, "What do they want?" And he said, "Connection." She said, "What's the evidence?" He said, "Well, they have marks on their skin, witnesses that they had missing time. There are scorch marks and radiation from the ground." Then the skeptic Nicholas Spanos is a psychological professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, And he said that this could be the power of suggestion. It could be sleep paralysis. He says Mack is all over the globe, and through historical time, Mack is telling him all over the globe, and through historical time, this has been a narrative, and that the biggest resistance comes from modern Western medicine. So, I don't know how that show ended. Chapter 32, The Man from Outer Space. He sent a copy of the book to Rudenstein, the head of Harvard, and he included a note. I know that this book has been generating a good deal of Harvard attention in the media, some of which is quite distorting of what I've done. I hope you will have a chance to read it, and we might then talk about what this means. And Rudenstein replied, it certainly looks like an intriguing book, and I look forward with great interest to reading it very soon. So the book is about how this phenomenon can expand our sense of ourself and our understanding of reality. He did see these as real experiences, and he did see them as breeding programs. James Wilworth from Time magazine did a Time article, and he called it The Man from Outer Space. Wilworth said, scientists question Mack's methods and motives, that he's misusing hypnotherapy, he's trying to shape memories, endangering the emotional health of people, that Donna Bassett was an undercover debunker and she hoaxed Mack and he fell for it. He accused Mack of not doing formal research and not using protocol, not getting consent forms from the people, and doing improper billing, and that proved to be not true. Anyway, Wentworth went on into the interview believing that Mack was full of shit and irresponsible. He saw his staff as a groupie situation, that Mack was a rooster in the barnyard, and that the experiencers were absolutely nuts. Bassett researched many abduction books. She told a story that she was abducted and met John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev on a UFO, and totally hoaxed Max. But it turns out that she had met Stryber a year before she talked to Mack. And the story with Stryber was that her family was involved in the government and in the military, and that she'd been encouraged to contact him, that she had lived at Oak Ridge, and the alien phenomenon was linked to sites of social activism, and she was all in on the story until it became public, and then she backpedaled. So the implication was she had connections to somebody who didn't want her to be talking. So they concocted this fake story. Later, Bassett was accused of mishandling money of the support group and of causing damage to Mack and the effort to legitimize and explore the phenomenon. So something was going on with her, an ulterior motive for sure. Hopkins was disgusted that Mack fell for her story, that he was taken by a con artist who did the whole research topic issue no justice. Chapter 33, a review of your work. New Republic journalist James Glurk said alien abduction is one of the country's tawdry belief manias since the 1960s. And he wrote The Doctor's Plot, that Mack was different from standard flying saucer nuts because he had authority. The article disparaged hypnosis, and it faulted Mack for not using controls. Glurk pointed out that Mack's aliens talked about saving the planet very much the way Mack had talked about saving the planet through his whole early career. He said memory is too easily manipulated. This is just all questionable. That these stories are ancients as gods and spirits. No. Mack sent a proposal for a pilot study to Cambridge Hospital, and he wanted to see is it possible that these people were in some sort of dissociative state? Then he made an appointment to talk with Edelstein and the Harvard executive dean for an academic program. That was his job description. And so the dean wrote this to John. During the past several weeks, we've received several inquiries concerning your work on alien abduction that relates to protocol formulation, informed consent, and patient billing. I am writing to inform you that Harvard Medical School is appointing a committee of senior faculty members to undertake a review of your work on alien abduction in response to these concerns that have been raised in the press and elsewhere. The review will not be in the nature of a scientific misconduct inquiry. Instead, we will ask the committee to examine both the clinical care and research aspects of the work to assure its compliance with standards expected of a faculty member of Harvard Medical School. Finally, let me emphasize that in undertaking this review, we are mindful of the right of any faculty member to espouse controversial or unpopular ideas. The subject of your work is not at issue here. Instead, our concern lies in accounts that we have read as to how and under what circumstance the work was carried out and what safeguards were in place for the subjects. We believe those issues are of sufficient weight to warrant the action being taken. So Arnold Relman was one of the guys on the panel, and he had Mack had drawn his ire when he was an activist in Doctors Against Nuclear Power. He was told by Edelstein that he should have said that he'd found a new psychiatric syndrome and not start challenging concepts of reality. Weeks later, in the Harvard Crimson publication, they did a big article called "The Medical School and John Mack Believe in Wicked Aliens." Chapter 34, Not an Inquisition. He felt he was on the dock before an array of accusers at the first committee meeting. He hadn't expected this. He was told that they were fact-finding and not an inquisition. And he could think what he wanted, but that he could not practice medicine any way he wanted. That there was a difference between clinical care and research and ethical issues at stake. He was asked, was he a clinician or a researcher? And he said both, in the tradition of Freud, Jung, and Erickson. He was on an investigative adventure with his clients, mapping out territory of phenomena that were not taken seriously. He didn't expect to make money. He helped clients with stress, and he charged for that with money that he did get going to a support group that they all belonged to. And they said, so this is sort of like a sexual assault trauma situation. And he said, that's fair enough to describe it that way. The experience was a subtle phenomena and not always physical. Eyewitnesses report that people went missing, that they reported the abduction later, but also people were seen in places who reported that they had thought that they had traveled in their head, but their bodies were still there. People saw them. So he was not an either-or, physical versus spiritual type person. The question was, there a standard protocol for treatment? And he said, in this case, the trauma existed, but the experience is not always just traumatic. They asked, are you neutral? Do you let them tell, or are you co-experiencer in some mystery? And he said both. Many people are like you, and I tell them many people are like you, and I can't explain it. I just, don't have any answers for them. He's asked, from your book, you seem to accept the premise that this is aliens. You take it seriously, and you're looking for the alien message. But there's no evidence. And he says, well, there is. There's consistent evidence. There's physical marks. And he's asked, can you rule out the possibility that's psychological? He says, no, I can't. Chapter 35, What If You're Wrong? So after his nephew, a Harvard MD, warned him, oh my God, they're doing what? You went and spoke to whom? He said, you better get yourself a lawyer. So he hired a lawyer and from this big law firm, and the lawyer he hired from the law firm, it also included Robert Mueller, who worked for the law firm. At the next meeting with the panel, Relman asked him, why didn't you look harder for conventional explanations? And Mack said, well, there didn't appear to be any. And he's asked, well, what if you're wrong? And he felt like that Relman was actually asking him, what if you're right? There's this element of fear there. He gave him the transcript of the 1992 MIT conference and said that the physics professor David Pritchard offered to appear on his behalf on the search for physical proof, like implants. Fred Frankel, the psychiatrist whose patient went to Mack, was adversarial because he felt like his patient left him for Mack. So he was very critical of his use of hypnosis. However, a second psychiatrist for the same woman said that she is actually much better since she saw Dr. Mack. Dr. Nutman, the head of the Department of Psychiatry, defended Mack and verified that the experiencers were not delusional, that something had happened to them, that they have organized around this story, but something absolutely happened to them. The panel began meeting with experiencers, and they interviewed them. They met with George Valent. They followed, he's a fellow psychiatric professor. He described this panel, like the Star Chamber, the English court from the 1400s to the 1600s. They were adversarial. He said there was no due process. He told them that Mack was highly moral, and he felt that this was not Mack trying to fool anybody, but he suspected maybe there was some sort of temporal lobe issue in the experiencers. Mack was introduced to a guy called Daniel P. Sheehan, who was a Harvard Law graduate and from the Divinity School, and he had almost become a Jesuit in his past. He led the Christic Institute, a public interest law firm that battled the Ku Klux Klan, that fought against Reagan in the Iran-Contra thing, defended the New York Times publication of the Pentagon Papers, won $10.5 million judgment for the estate of Karen Silkwood, and was involved in Watergate and involved in Wounded Knee. So, big guy. He knew a lot about UFOs because he was closely involved with the Vatican's observatory and had been shown confidential material from the library at the Vatican and from the library at Congress, the Library of Congress, about Project Blue Book. He knew about Mack, and they met in Cambridge, and Mack was thinking that his present lawyer had a conflict of interest because his present lawyer was working for the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. So Sheehan was outraged that Mack had been told to cooperate. He told him that he was in legal jeopardy. So Sheehan called his pal, Lawrence Tribe. Now, Lawrence Tribe is very famous. He's considered the preeminent constitutional expert in the United States. He had Obama as a research assistant. So he hooked Mack up with a guy called Eric Makesh Jr., the grandnephew. Oh, I'm sorry, I read my handwriting wrong. I have horrible handwriting. By the time I get to the end of a book, it's just illegible. Eric McLeish Jr., the grandnephew of poet Archibald McLeish, and a leading Boston civil liberties lawyer with academic plaintiffs who he represented victims of the Boston priests accused of sexual abuse cases, 70 people from 3 parishes who were abused by the same priest that became the movie Spotlight. He is the one who represented the victims and became Mack's lawyer. Sheehan's litigation plan was a 21-point action plan. Let me see if this if I need to read any of this to you. So Sheehan was all in on this. He says, let me tell you, I view the potential contact by the human family with beings from an extraterrestrial source of intelligence to be the single most important potential event in the history of the human family in effectuating a transformation of the consciousness of the human family from the present state of our evolution of consciousness to the next. He compared Mack's revelations to those of Galileo and Darwin, hailing his challenge of the entire Newtonian, Cartesian, scientific, materialist paradigm upon which your critics' very status and stature as professionals directly depends. Moreover, Mack was dashing headlong into the spiritual world of reincarnation and life after death, not to mention alien-human interbreeding. So here's a guy who's pretty open to all of this. So he had a 21-point action plan, and he ended the bottom of the action plan. The last action was a threat. We're going to go public and bring a lawsuit against Harvard. So Relman and the whole committee were shocked when Mack showed up next time with Sheehan and McLeish in tow. They were horrified. And he gave them this presentation and said, okay, you guys are persecuting this guy just because he's got some interesting ideas. Chapter 36, Aliens in Africa. Now this is really interesting. I've talked about this before. I recommend you go online. It's a little hard to find the video. It took me forever. I was aware of it, and it still took me forever. But if you're interested, while I'm going through this, write down the name of the school and the people involved, and look it up on YouTube, because you can see Mack's interviews with these people are on video. At least they were within this last year. So at 10 p.m. September 14th, 1994, in Harare, Zimbabwe, the BBC got a phone call from Tim Leach. Tim Leach, the BBC guy, got a phone call from the head immigration officer in Harare. Something large and weird had flown over his house, and this was confirmed by air traffic control. And it hovered over the airport and then shot away at incredible speeds towards South African airspace. Leach investigated the witnesses and found a group, including quantum physicist David Ash. They were all having a party on a veranda at 9 p.m. They saw flashes go across the sky in the formation of 10 of them together, and they were not meteorites. A local radio host was overwhelmed with phone calls of people who saw this. So 2 days later, the journalist Leach talked to the MUFON Continental Coordinator for Africa, and she said, call John Mack. So more of a strange story. The sightings went on for 3 days in Zambia, Victoria Falls, Botswana, South Africa. The Praetorian government, South Africa, they tried to suppress the story. They wanted no part of it. So in Ruva, there was a school in a small rural area. And this is where this story just gets really interesting. Now, the spelling of the town is R-U-W-A, Ruva, a small agricultural crossroads 14 miles southeast of Harare. Administrators herded 200 children inside after they said a strange craft appeared at the schoolyard. A black man got out and the object flew off at tremendous speed. Leach told the BBC that they were taking the matter seriously, collecting interviews, but still searching for good video. The school children had been pulled off the playground at break time between 10 and 10:30 while a strange small craft hovered over the trees and landed and let out a black man, possibly an indigenous Zimbabwean. A local man who had called Leach to say he had a photo of the UFO had not been heard of again. Since the radio appeal, Leach wrote, he had been inundated with calls and was investigating the case of a 3-year-old girl who saw a lion outside her bedroom, but when she drew a childlike picture, it was no lion. Lions do not stand up. He had loads of material, but barely 30 seconds of amateur video of pictures that looked like someone with a torch drunkenly looking for a toilet in the dark. Leach's last appeal to Mack was the strangest of all. Please advise how I get to contact the visitors. I gather there are 2 types, friendly and the reverse. So this is a BBC journalist writing to Mack and telling him very briefly what happened and saying, hey, help me get in contact with these aliens. Great stuff. Chapter 37, Have Good Manners. So children at this elite primary day school got a close-up of something. The Progressive Ariel School, A-R-I-E-L School, you might have to Google that, Ariel School, started only 3 years before by religious parents of various denominations, served 230 1st to 7th graders ages 6 to 13. The children were a cross-section of modern Africa, tribal, black, tawny mixed race, Asian, and post-colonial blonde and freckled British white. The headmaster, Colin Mackey, told Hind that at about 10:15 that Friday morning, the children were in the playing field when, as roughly 60 of them later reported, 3 silver balls appeared in the sky over the school. They disappeared with a flash of light and reappeared elsewhere, repeating again until they started to move down toward the school. One of the objects hovered over or landed at an overgrown tract about 100 meters away where the children were not allowed. Several of them reported a small man about 1 meter tall in a tight-fitting black suit appearing on top of the object. He walked across the rough ground, saw the children, and disappeared. Then he or another small man appeared at the back of the object, which took off swiftly and disappeared. So the teachers were in a meeting when this happened. The headmaster brought all the children in because they freaked out and went running in to report, and had them all sit down and draw what they'd seen. The whole area was investigated by MUFON, by a TV producer who had a half-brother who went to the school, who called immediately and said, hey, you gotta get over here, and sent a camera crew. Mack flew to Africa and interviewed the kids on film. And several saw 2 men get out and run around, and they described them as, this is the children's words, dwarves. A number of ships and a mothership, so there was more than one object, kept going in and out and vanishing and reappearing. Different kids saw more or less stuff. So then he asked this child, how did it make her feel? She says, I sometimes think that they want to tell us something in the future. Like what? Mack asked. Maybe they were telling us the world was going to end because we've got to look after the planet, the air, properly. She added, I felt all horrible inside. When did she feel the horribleness? When I got home, she said, it was like the world, all the trees would just go down and there would be no air and people would be dying. So he talked to the teachers and he took a hands vote, and only one of them thought that the kids were making it up. The teachers believed the children. Chapter 38, Oh God. The Harvard Committee had 27 sessions with 14 witnesses, 4 experiencers and the mother of one of them. They listened to over 30 hours of tapes of hypnotic sessions. They read Mack's book. They read his articles. They read the transcript for the MIT conference. They put out a 30-page draft report. They did not recommend any action be taken against him. They did not accuse him of misconduct, but they could still impose sanctions. They couldn't decide, is this research or therapy? Are these subjects or patients? And about the UFOs, are they either man-made, natural, or a fraud? They said that Mack was pressuring the experiencers to believe that it was alien abduction, that there was no serious effort to seek an alternative explanation, and that he acted as if these were actual memories of actual events and not some psychological phenomenon. There was no documentation with physical evidence, no peer review, no informed consent, and they concluded that his clinical approval did not conform to accepted standards of sound psychiatric practice. It was unscientific and unscholarly. His lawyer Sheehan saw this as Mack's golden opportunity to prove the reality of abductions. Mack's lawyers needed to attack this report because Pellman not only was prosecuting this case, but he had just gotten appointed to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine, the licensing and disciplinary board for doctors. So he was the prosecutor on this committee, and he was the judge on the medical board. He could withhold Mack's license. So Mack wrote a 50-page rebuttal. He hit many points, but especially that he did not claim that the abduction stories were accurate accounts of real events, but that they could not be explained away. He felt that Harvard was desperate to keep all of this quiet, and his lawyers took a debating approach. Those that were contacted were irate. The contactees were irate with Harvard, and they spread the word that there was a persecution of going on, like the persecution of Galileo in the hands of an equally short-sighted Catholic Church. This is from Dennis Hawk, a MUFON expert and a famous mathematician. He called it a kangaroo court. Mack was freaked out. He had wanted this whole thing to be kept quiet, and he fired Sheehan because Sheehan went public with it. And it brought an avalanche of press. It was called a witch hunt, and they were stifling academic freedom. Now, this is where I came in, and this is what I had heard about it, and I believed these characterizations. And this is not entirely what happened. I guess it depends on your point of view, but these accusations were intentionally made public by his lawyer trying to push for a more public acceptance of the idea. So his final formal response was 80 pages long. Of course, his lawyers were writing this, that this whole committee was an affront to academic freedom and a moral disgrace. He got lots of support about his techniques and his work from fellow professors and clinicians. Valiant told Rudenstein, the Harvard professor, that the inquiry itself was dangerous for Harvard. David Jacobs was interviewed, and he said, well, Temple University considers me to be an embarrassment also. I love David Jacobs. After 11 months, Harvard finally came out with a 41-page report, basically the same conclusions that they had before, but they did blame Harvard Medical School for not supervising Mack carefully enough. They didn't keep him under control. The final report did not reflect steps that Mack had taken to rule out psychopathology. They just ignored that. It did not interview experts, physicists, astronomers who supported what Mack had to say. His students at Harvard Medical Psychiatric Department wrote in his defense. They all signed a big letter of defense. Even Alan Dershowitz wrote just that it was a threat to all academic research because they were looking at it as they thought the subject matter was suspect, Harvard did, and that they were denying him academic freedom to explore ideas beyond the pale. So he was called to Tostison's office, and he was given a letter, and it said, John, I hope you are aware that it's not my intention to keep you from the study of a group of individuals whose perceived experience is hurtful to them, nor to prevent you from treating their emotional distress. Nor do I wish to deny your right to postulate a syndrome with a heterodox etiology. I'm concerned, however, that in your enthusiasm you do not violate the high standards for the conduct of clinical practice and clinical investigation that have been the hallmark of this faculty. Walking a line between the rights of members of the faculty to inquire freely and the rights of patients and subjects is sometimes not easy. As stewards for the Faculty of Medicine, we need to protect both. I hope you will help. So Harvard prepared a terse press release saying that Mack had been cautioned not to violate Harvard's high clinical standards, but reaffirming his academic freedom to study what he wishes and share his ideas without impediment. And it concluded, Dr. Mack remains a member in good standing of the Harvard Faculty of Medicine. It was over. Chapter 39, We Watch the X-Files. So his marriage at 36 years ended, and he flew to Australia with his girlfriend for a rest and to talk with Aboriginal people about UFO sightings. He called in the alien phenomena an outreach program from the cosmos to the spiritually impaired. And then he went to Brazil and talked about government cover-ups and contacts that had happened in Brazil. Chapter 40, The Lighthouse. Cambridge, 1996, two authors put out a new theory that the alien abduction was a psychological escape into masochism. This is really an interesting theory, that it was elicited and shaped by professors who were a facilitator and a believer, Mack, and reinforced in support groups of like-minded people. And they related it to the same psychological need that some had to be tied up and subjected to pain, that it was an escape from self-awareness, that it was a comfort they found comfort in a loss of control and submission, and the experiencer population overlapped with masochists. This was their theory. That it was a Western experience, a white experience, socioeconomically of the upper class, and that the stories were like masochistic rituals. Well, he responded and he said, hey, you're not doing your research. They're not all white. They're not all Western. They're not all upper class, and most of them are very private, not joiners, don't get involved in groups, and are not getting pleasure from it, not seeking it out for pleasure. He met with Hopkins to do a presentation about abduction. Was it traumatic or transformational? Did it occur in the physical or the spiritual reality? Hopkins believed it was traumatic and real. Mack also believed that beyond that it was informational, like about the ecological damage, that it was telepathic communication and a hybrid breeding, so he took it farther. The spiritual aspect fostered a sense of oneness, he believed. So he believed it occurred on both planes, whereas Hopkins was more, it's just physical. Mack believed it was a shock to the dominant paradigm, and therefore shocking to society, that our notion of reality needed to be expanded to fathom this phenomenon, and proof might never materialize. It's not like that. Hopkins said that you couldn't trust ETs, and Mack said that trauma gave a greater awareness. It was an awareness to people who experienced it. It was a trauma for some of them, and non-Western cultures were more likely to understand it. Rockefeller, who had been giving him funding, said to Mack, you are the lighthouse, you are the beacon. And that Mack believed the notion of the reality of the whole thing was supported by Lawrence Rockefeller and Edgar Mitchell. And he reached out to Carl Sagan and said, look, we need physical evidence. And all these famous people working together. Chapter 41, Abduction and Divinity. Mack took Harvard up on the idea and met with 22 people at the Harvard Divinity School for a 2-day interdisciplinary conference. More science study was urged. They wanted to look at the physics of beams of light, the physics of traveling through solids. They wanted to look at the psychiatry of anxiety. Relman criticized Mack for not addressing the central question, are these real physical events? Mack responded that the conference was meant to explore the nature of the phenomena and its meaning for experiencers, not to determine if this was real or not. Mack was the visionary, and Relman was the materialist. Jeff Redger, a psychiatrist theologian and the director of Harvard's Associate Hospital of Middleborough, Massachusetts, said that Relman was being too dualistic and simplistic, that objective reality is not always tangible that way. Michael Zimmerman from Tulane said it could be explained as the result of a multidimensional universe. Chapter 42, Passport to the Cosmos. So Mack wanted to write a sequel to Abduction, and in 1999 he wrote Passport to the Cosmos, Human Transformation and Alien Encounters, the most important thing he's written, he said. The preface was written by Edgar Mitchell, who called it a broader reframing of the abduction phenomenon, and one of the mysterious crossovers confronting human consciousness, that it was in some ways related to the near-death experience, the out-of-body experience, animal mutilation, crop circles, the apparitions of Mary, shamanic soul flights. Will Crookes, a big early 20th century scientist, had been sent to debunk, read about this in Leslie Kean's book, sent to debunk a medium, Daniel Douglas Home. Remember when pieces of arms and legs were materializing through mediums? Mack saw the association with these extraordinary kinds of phenomena. Energies, energetic light, vibrating beams. Karen Austin, who worked with Mack, first as an experiencer and later as an assistant, felt like she had been in a light socket when these things happened to her, that sparks just scream off you, and it made her very telepathic afterwards. So theoretically, is this where theoretical physics and spirituality met? Or is this something about undiscovered dimensions? Mack focused on the apocalyptic messages of nuclear and ecological cataclysm then. He hadn't at first, now he was. And he says the damage that we've inflicted has not gone unnoticed. Experiencers believe their vibratory rate was reprogrammed to receive these messages. They didn't just happen spontaneously. They felt different. And, going back to the kids at the Ariel school, all of them who witnessed this told the adults that they felt like something was going to happen, something not good was going to happen. Some experiencers thought that aliens showed the destruction of their planet as a warning to the Earth. Mack said, are these archetypes of the world ending and the destruction, are they just visions of a new hybrid race? Are they creating something? Are they trying, sort of metaphorically saying that's the end of one world and the beginning of another, and that these hybrid creatures will know love and emotions better than the aliens do, but be smarter than humans are, and then inhabit the earth and take care of it? Mack postulated perhaps the hybrid programs were not really physical, but on a vibratory dimension, an evolution of consciousness. And that the success for the planet would come with a new species and new awareness. Is that what was going on? In his second book, he put Abduction in the context of other mystical encounters and archetypes. The deepest message was transformational, the transformational aspects. Most experiencers felt a spiritual power or potential for personal transformation as a pathway to the one. And this ended with a question, was any of this real? Mack said it was most important to ask, did this signal that there are other dimensions of reality? The book was greeted with a wall of silence. Chapter 43, A Cosmic Marriage. Abductees often say that in a past life they agreed to do this here to help awaken us and bring a different consciousness. He speculated that we're spirits in a body for experience, that the body is not who we are. Interesting that a materialist person coming from no background of spirituality, being grown up, came to the same conclusion, that we are really spirits in a body, that the body is just a vehicle. Abductees felt a connection to the divine that complicated being in physical reality, and some even considered suicide after this event to return to their spiritual home. So Mack was having struggles still with his girlfriend. He was not good at relationships. And he had this new interest in life after death. He had put aside the abduction thing pretty much and was now involved in studying near-death experiences in life after death. He was friends. We know this story. We did this story in the book of Leslie Kean. He was friends with Elizabeth Terry, and we've read about her in the books on life and death. Her father, Russell, was the laser physicist who co-founded a parapsychology program at Stanford Research Institute in 1972. They studied remote viewing. They studied ESP. It was funded by the CIA. They looked into the USSR. Russell and his wife Joan were related to Bobby Fischer. She was the sister of Bobby Fischer, the chess champion. So Bobby Fischer was Elizabeth's uncle. She had ESP as a child. She graduated high school at the age of 15, taught herself Russian, studied neuropharmacology. This story is starting to be remembered. She was famous for the study of AIDS patients with glioblastoma. She was doing a study with distant prayer, healing from 40 spiritual healers from a variety of different belief systems. And with these 40 remote healers, all 10 of her patients survived, who were the focus of the healers. She got funding from the National Institute of Health, a $1.5 million grant. So then they studied another 40 who had glioblastoma. She developed glioblastoma and died just before her 41st birthday. And she's the one who people started, I'll just summarize this really quickly. I'm trying to shorten this and not go too long because we're pretty much down to our last chapter. She's the one who, she'd learned Russian and she died so tragically young, and she was into ESP. Her friends started dreaming of her all the time and being told in the dream to call her family and say she was okay. Then a friend got a message from her that she wrote phonetically because it made no sense. She called her husband, Elizabeth's widower, and said, "Your wife contacted me in my sleep last night, and this is the message. It makes no sense. I wrote it phonetically." And he wrote it down phonetically. And they later figured out it was Russian. She had taught Russian. She learned Russian. It was in Russian, and it was something like, "I love you and I'm with you forever," or something like that. So Mack's grandmother died in 2002 at the age of 99. And he got very interested in cases of reincarnation, life after death, and the paranormal. He was working on a possible book about the ideology and intolerance and his struggle versus the dominant Western materialistic paradigm, and that had a constricted idea of reality. He was helped. He helped with a document about abduction. He spoke in Florence about establishing a new science of human experience. He called crop circles the ultimate shatterer of the materialistic worldview. He arranged a trip to England to study crop circles. He thought that they were alien and they were all from a source. He met at a UFO retreat with Bud Hopkins, Leslie Kean, and some experiencers. Then he went to the 10th annual Newport Alien Festival, and he talked about a new interest in life after death. As he described his death research, the guy he was talking to confessed he had a fear of dying. And Mack said to him, and this is a quote, "You never know when it will be your time. We could all go at any time. I could walk out on the street and get hit by a car." Yikes. Chapter 45, the Rune, R-U-N-E, of Doom. His son Kenny married an international lawyer from Kazakhstan on Cape Ann, Massachusetts in 2004. Without invitation, Peter Jennings and an ABC crew showed up, unannounced, for an episode of Life and the Universe, which was airing in 2005, about UFOs, that seeing is believing was the idea. And it did air, but they left out the part with Mack in it, even though they came unannounced and interrupted his family experience. His benefactor, Lawrence Rockefeller, died in 2004. Rockefeller had also supported Stryber and confessed that his contacts in the government told him that UFOs were real and the most heavily guarded secret, which he told the Clintons. And Hillary Clinton told Rockefeller, "Don't ever raise that subject with me again." He began having serious vision problems, Mack did. And he often liked to begin his institute meetings with a rune. And the last meeting, before his trip to England, he drew a blank rune. And the blank rune is a symbol for death. Some remembered someone saying that the blank could portend death. Mack laughed it off, but when the meeting later grew tense, Mack covered his eyes with his hands and said, "Sometimes I think it would be a lot easier for me to do this work from the other side." Chapter 46, I never knew it would be so easy. So he went to Oxford for a T.E. Lawrence symposium, September of 2004. He met with the widow of Montague Keene, who had died in January of a heart attack at the age of 78. He was a hero of Mack's, and so, worked with his psychical research, which was a major life-after-death study. His widow told Mack that he was contacting her from beyond. Then Mack met in London with Rupert Sheldrake, which that name should be familiar. He was the one who had the theory of morphic resonance, that all of nature is connected by an energy like an ether. Mack looked the wrong way while walking home from the dinner with Rupert Sheldrake and stepped into traffic because he was in England. He looked the wrong way and stepped into traffic crossing the street and was hit by a car. The moment he was hit by a car, although his friend didn't know this, his friend had a panic attack and went and sat with his body when she got the phone call because he didn't come home. And while she was sitting with his body, because he was dead, she heard his voice, and his voice said, "I never knew it would be so easy." 2 days after his death, she arranged a seance. With Danny's arrival, she offered to cancel it, his son, but Danny said she should go ahead. John came through and described his death. "It was as if I was touched with a feather. I did not feel a thing. I was given a choice, should I go or should I stay? I looked at my broken body and decided to go. And there was Montague, the guy who had just died of the heart attack, there was Monty waiting for me." So, chapter 47, John Mack now knows everything. November 13th, 2004, Harvard had a memorial service for him. The guy who hit him had been drinking and got 15 months in jail. Mack's family went to court and tried to make it so that he would not suffer any time in jail. He didn't suffer very much, but they didn't think that it was fair. It was Mack's fault because he forgot that he was in England and he looked the wrong way. Let's see. He visited several people who were friends of his in their sleep and gave them messages, personal messages. he told one of them, when you're afraid, stay still. Notice the fear instead of running from fear. This is so important. I think this applies to our political situation. Notice fear instead of running from fear to some addiction like sex or food or drugs or getting angry with somebody. Stop and notice what it is to be with fear. If you stay with fear, fear is a vehicle for the opening of consciousness to connectedness and love. Fear is permeated with insecurity. All our problems really derive from our reactions to fear. I may be afraid, but if I look at fear, stay with it, examine it, be with it, go into it, it transforms. So fear is the most powerful vehicle of shifting awareness and enabling transformation that we have. Use fear rather than escaping from it as we do in this country by giving people Librium and other tranquilizers. Fear, he said, was a pathway to courage. Courage is simply fear that is not. That's the message of this book, which I just could not believe how timely that was, given the conversations that we've had about facing our current political situation head on. There's your message from John Mack. I'm going to stop now. I've run very, very long. I didn't want to do a real short fourth video, so this is a too long third video. And we'll read cards about this. And thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you like this book, and it does lead into our book next week. Not a political book. So there's that to look forward to. And in the meantime, Slongafoil and Slancha.